The Dalai Lama said, "Nirvana has a wonderful scent, like flowers. You can tell it when you're around someone connected with Nirvana. You can tell it around places where there's that fragrance of peace, well-being, and liberation," says Jack Kornfield in this special episode of the Heart Wisdom Podcast, episode 297, Advice from the Dalai Lama, the Fragrance of Nirvana. This is going to be a two-part series stemming from March 29th, 1993, where Jack had just gotten back to Spirit Rock after spending some quality time with the Dalai Lama, and so is filled with some amazing reflections about the Dalai Lama, how he holds himself, and about Buddhism in general. This is somewhat of a retrospective on where Buddhism was in 93, and so much of it can be really applied to Buddhism today in 2025. Now, if you're listening when this comes out, this was not planned, and I love when this happens. We've been going in somewhat of a sequential order for these vintage episodes, and these two Dalai Lama episodes happen to line up quite nicely with the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday, which just happened about a week ago, as well as the Dalai Lama's powerful, spiritual, and political statement that he will have a tulku. There will be another Dalai Lama after he passes, chosen by and through his Tibetan lineage. I don't know if you've looked too much into Mahayana or Vajrayana Buddhism, but the phenomenon of the tulku is really something powerful to be looked at and experienced. Not every school of Buddhism is going to outwardly state if reincarnation or rebirth is real or not. But in Tibetan Buddhism, they live this as a reality. In my extremely rudimentary knowledge around this, when a lama or a rinpoche passes, they are able to traverse the bardos and take rebirth somewhere here on this earth. And other lamas and rinpoches that are still in the body, that were very connected to the being that passed, get a sort of vision that shows them the place of the rebirth of this great holy being that they spent so much time with. And lo and behold, they will go to this place and they will find a newborn child. And I believe a series of tests are done at that point. One of them being they will lay out a large grouping of objects, a number of them being this rinpoches or lamas, the one who has passed, some of their old holy items. And once again, lo and behold, the child will, if it's them, will inevitably crawl towards those exact items. There's a documentary on Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche, who is very close to the Dalai Lama and who passed some years ago. I believe it was called Brilliant Moon. And in it, you can actually see the footage, which gives me chills when I see it, of Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche's successor, his rebirth, his reincarnation, what is known in Tibetan Buddhism as a tulku. You can watch this child sitting on this throne, Khyentse Yangtze Rinpoche, sitting there in nobility and honor, blessing beings as they come up to say hello again, to give their praise and their love for the continuation of this wisdom body, for the continuation of the compassion and bodhicitta, which was cultivated over many, 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 many lifetimes. I don't know about you guys, I was rolling around on the ground, playing with action figures. I was deeply into Sonic the Hedgehog. I could not sit still. So to watch this footage in Brilliant Moon and to see the integrity and concentration and focus of this, what seems to be a child but is this ancient being, is life-changing. So for the Dalai Lama to make this statement at this time that he will indeed have a successor, that there will be a Dalai Lama Tulku, and he will continue this chain of being for the Tibetan people and for the world at large, is quite a major statement. And we are honored here at Camp Jack and Be Here Now Network to offer this 2-part Dalai Lama series wholly on serendipity at this time. The only bit of housekeeping I have this week is something I've teased quite a bit, and will tease once again right here. We found some lost tapes, some unearthed Jack Kornfield footage of a retreat at Yucca Valley in the 1990s. It is wonderful vintage footage. Jack's wardrobe is really on point, and the teachings really still ring true and spark something in the heart. It's a great overview of the whole spiritual path, and really Jack sharing from a zesty, fun, and focused place. As I said, the footage is just spectacular, seeing the retreat in the 1990s. So if you've wanted to know what it was like to go on retreat with Jack back in the day, this course is for you. That will be up on jackkornfield.com as soon as we finish some of the editing process. And I really hope you will dive in and enjoy this amazing, quite rare vintage retreat, taking the sacred journey with Jack Kornfield. Otherwise, I implore you to join the Year of Awakening for some live stream hangs with Jack each month, as well as some teachings. And jackkornfield.com is always an open door for amazing courses, brilliant articles, guided meditations, Dharma Talks, and so much more. Hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed this episode 297 of the Heart Wisdom Podcast. Advice from the Dalai Lama, the fragrance of Nirvana. May you be happy and healthy. May you be loved and strong. May you help others through your authenticity. And may you live a life that exudes the beautiful fragrance of Nirvana. Namaste.
Delighted to be back at Spirit Rock. I've been traveling for a bit, as many of you know, and just to come back in the spring and have the hills so green and the meadows filled with those yellow flowers and the kind of vibrancy of spring. It's fantastic. So I've just returned from a brief trip, 9 days in India and a couple of days in Thailand, teacher meetings with the Dalai Lama. Still feels a little bit like the middle of the night or the middle of the morning or something, but I hope I'll be coherent tonight. What I'd like to do is to tell some of the story of this gathering with the Dalai Lama, because for its own value as Dharma teachings, and also to give those of you who've been involved with meditation practice for some time at Spirit Rock, to give a perspective that we're a part of some much larger movement than just our own individual practice. My role in these meetings was to be the moderator, and so I began with the Dalai Lama by presenting him with this book that some of you may have seen called Buddhist America, the new edition, which is just about to come out, is a listing of approximately 1,000 Buddhist centers around the U.S. of Tibetan and Zen and Theravada and other such things. 20 years ago, when I first came back from the monastery, there were a handful, literally maybe half a dozen, and now there's 1,000. So there's something happening. In the last sutra, the last teachings of the Buddha, the Mahāparinirvāṇa Sūtra, the last great series of the Buddha's teachings before he died, he speaks about the importance of the gathering of those together who follow the path of the Dharma, the path of truth in their life, and how important it is that people gather together regularly and speak about that which they value in their lives, that they gather in harmony, that they meet in concord and that they disperse in concord, that they follow the laws of enlightenment, the cultivation of loving kindness, of virtue, of the practices of awakening of the body and mind and heart, that they honor the great traditions of the elders and ancestors, that they speak truthfully with one another, and that they preserve in the most personal way the practice of wakefulness or mindfulness, and encourage one another to live with contentment in this world, in this life. And he said, if you meet in harmony and concord and follow the teachings of the Dharma and speak truthfully, practice in your own personal life that which you value, then the Dharma will prosper and not decline on this earth. For as many years as beings come together in this way, will these teachings be of benefit and prosper. And in some way I felt that the meetings with the Dalai Lama were held in that spirit. For 2,500 years there have been gatherings of elders and councils, of monks and teachers, and this was a new version of that. So we gathered in Dharamsala, in this little town in the far north of India that's perched up along the wall of the Himalayan mountains. And flying into the town, if you fly, as I did, to that part of India, you fly along the 2,000-mile rock wall of the Himalayas that goes up from 800 feet, the plains of India, 20,000 feet straight up. I mean, fantastic, unbelievable. And you look over it, if your plane goes high enough, and there is an ocean of mountain peaks, 20,000, 25,000 feet high, incredible mountains, ocean of snow peaks. And there in Dharamsala, the Dalai Lama held this meeting in his personal palace where he lives. And there's a community of Tibetan refugees and temples, and the government in exile are there. And the town, this little village, is filled with Tibetan people. The refugees in some ways are some of the poorer people in India. I mean, they're refugees to begin with, and Tibet was not a materially rich country in the ways that we think of. So here they are, refugees in a very poor country with very little, and yet they're wonderful people, and they're incredibly happy. It's amazing to see all the things that they don't have, and how incredibly happy they are, probably because they don't have them, right? They're gracious, and they're generous, and the children are just smile at you. You could die just seeing the Tibetan children. They're so beautiful. I have some pictures of some little Tibetan children as lamas here, and they're just wonderful. Anyone wants to come and see. So we gathered together 22 Western Buddhist teachers, some Zen Roshis. Sure, go ahead. You're a child. You need to look at the kids on the other side of the world. Some Zen Roshis, including Bill Kwong, Jaksho Kwong Roshi from Sonoma Zen Center, and other Western Zen masters from various temples, Tibetan lamas and monks and nuns, several wonderful lamas from Europe, lamas who had done the 3 or 6 year intensive training retreats as Westerners, French and English, Lama Drugyu and others, and then come out to be teachers, and various Vipassana teachers, to explore the problems and the possibilities of Dharma Buddhist Dharma teaching coming to the West. And some of it was brilliant presentations. Stephen Batchelder, who's a Vipassana and Zen teacher and a historian, gave this wonderful lecture on the dialogue of the Buddha and the West, starting with the Greek teacher Menander and his description of understanding what the Buddha's teachings were, and certain sutras where the Buddha mentions the Greeks. So already, even in the time of the Buddha, they were kind of talking to one another. And early Christians, and how Buddhism changed when it went to China or Tibet and Japan, and met the Taoist culture of the Chinese or the samurai culture. The Dalai Lama was very, very interested thinking about this kind of history and how it might then apply in current time to the West. But then it was time, as he said, to get down to business and not just kind of talk about things of the past or what the blessings of the Dharma, but to really openly address the problems, and out of this to see how we could work together. So we sat in a circle in this room in the Dalai Lama's palace for much of the week, and he was flanked by a half a dozen other great respected Tibetan teachers. And he would come in, we'd all sit there first, and he would come in and he'd smile and he'd go around and shake everybody's hand. And even to shake hands with the Dalai Lama, he comes up and he shakes your hand and he looks at you to make sure that you're really, there. And then it lingers for a minute. It's not like a cursory handshake, but it's that extra couple of seconds where you just hold your hand to make sure that you really make contact with him. It's totally wonderful to shake this man's hand. So he comes in, and I brought back a few pieces of wonderful Buddhist art. There's a tanka that you can see over there, a sacred painting, which is the Buddha Avalokiteshvara, or the Bodhisattva, who is depicted with 1,000 arms and 1,000 pairs of eyes. If you look, it's painted, you can count them. There's exactly 1,000 the artist did. And that is 1,000 hands to touch every single being in every realm, in every dimension of life, and to awaken in them the great heart of compassion and the awakening of the Buddha. The Dalai Lama is supposed to be that person. In the Tibetan mythology or understanding, that Buddha who brings compassion to every being is born each lifetime in the form of the Dalai Lama. That's who the Dalai Lama is supposed to be. And he seems it. He's absolutely wonderful. I mean, you get to hear my opinions a lot here. So tonight I'm going to talk about what the Dalai Lama had to say, sort of for a change and benefit. From the beginning, he said, deep down what matters is only the spirit of compassion, only what benefits beings in every form, in every realm on this earth. And he spoke to us as teachers. He said, don't think how I can spread Buddhism in some way. It doesn't matter if there's even one or two more Buddhists. It doesn't matter at all. The only thing that matters is the well-being of each person and the well-being of the earth that we live on. This is what matters. And the rest of it is really secondary, is unimportant. So we began. And one of the early discussions we had was about transmission from teacher to student, the authorization of the role of a teacher. Who is a genuine teacher? If someone pats you on the head and said, now you are a Zen master, or whatever, how does this happen? And we're talking about the different ways that happens. And Kwang Roshi asked the Dalai Lama what was his perspective on it. And he was quiet for a moment and he said, strictly speaking, no one can create a teacher. No one can authorize a teacher, say, now you are a teacher. Said, it is only the students of that teacher who can do so. If what that teacher does brings benefit to the hearts of those students and brings awakening to the lives of those students, then you can say, yes, that is a true teacher. That's where the teacher comes from, by the benefit that they do. And in fact, no one knows, not even a teacher can know in transmitting to a student their understanding. You can't really know whether your student gets it or not, whether you can say, all right, this person now is ready to teach. Only within oneself can you know your own realization? So what matters is the benefit that you bring from your own practice to others around you. He said, however, nirvana, you should remember, nirvana has a wonderful smell, a beautiful scent like flowers, a wonderful flavor. And you can tell it when you're around people who are connected with nirvana. You can tell it around places where there's that odor, that fragrance of peace, and that fragrance of well-being, and that fragrance of liberation. So he said, you should, look for that, smell that, listen for that. Then the question came, well, what about imperfect gurus, imperfect teachers? And in Tibet, one takes vows to follow a teacher, spend years following this teacher and doing whatever they say. And he said, you must go back and tell these Western students, he said, you must caution them. They should not take teachers so quickly, Tell them they should spy on their teachers. He said, maybe many years, 4 years, 10 years, 12 years, you look to see. And only when you are convinced that this person is really, has the kind of integrity, is really authentically awakened in some way, that they will really be of benefit in your life, only then follow them. Westerners taking teachers too quickly. Yes. So then we asked the Dalai Lama, and again, we all talked together and we all had our own opinions, which I won't tell you about. Fortunately, the Dalai Lama thinks much like I do, so. Or something like that. So then we said, all right, let's get down to even greater difficulties. What about the problems of the teachers, even ones who are great Zen masters or great lamas in their traditions, who bop into town, famous teachers, give these initiations, these high Tibetan teachings and so forth, which, along with those initiations, are vows that you take, that for the rest of your life you will practice these teachings and do it in this and such a way, or else you will betray all of the teachings. And then 2 days later, the teacher splits to go, do it in Las Vegas or Des Moines or somewhere else, and they come and they give these high teachings and then they disappear. And there you are left with this, this great initiation and all these vows you've taken and no support. And the Dalai Lama thought about it. He said, I must talk to these teachers. You definitely should not give practices and initiations unless you are sure that students are fully prepared and that they know, that they understand the practices and can really use them in their life. This is not something to play with or bring crowds about. And then he thought for a little while. He was kind of quiet. And he kind of looked up sheepishly. He said, of course, I am doing this with the Kala Chakra initiation, he said, but it is different. The Kala Chakra is, the Dalai Lama is one of the few people in all of Tibet who can do this wonderful teaching on the wheel of time and the liberation, the awakening from the illusion of the whole cycle of existence of birth and death. And it's quite an extraordinary teaching. And he said, I'm thinking, he said, maybe if I just go and teach about ethics, no one will come. So I go and I say, Dalai Lama is doing Kala Chakra initiation, great teachings. Many thousands people come. He said, I'm not so concerned about initiation, actually. Then I teach them about kindness. That's really, he said, I get them to come and I teach them about kindness. And that's really what matters for him. It's not... So he said, and he was a little sheepish about it. He said, all right, I know I do it too, but I don't do it in order to give people vows or practices. If they understand that, that's wonderful. But I use that as a vehicle to teach what's more fundamental and important. So we talked with him about the difficulty of the role of the teacher and how isolating it can be and how one needs colleagues as teachers and friends. As we do in the Vipassana community, we really team teach retreats and have a lot of colleagues and time to rest and not always be in this role. And someone was presenting the kind of difficulties to him and said that it's important that teachers have time to be off duty, not just in that role. And the Dalai Lama said, "Off duty?" And that's its translator, "What does this mean, off duty?" And they kind of back and forth, took him a little while to figure out finally, off duty. And then he kind of meditated for a little bit. And he looked at us as teachers, he looked around the room, and he said, "Bodhisattva off duty?" It's like Buddha off duty? Very strange concept, yeah. He said, your responsibility, you might not be teaching all the time, but your responsibility is to your practice. He said, he said, one time I'm staying in a hotel, and there's this television. He said, and I turn on, and there's, what do you say, dirty movie. He said, so first I think maybe I should just turn off, and then I think, this is my practice, I will look. And it is arousing some feelings, and I think, no, I must meditate. And I did. I said, this is very important. I do my meditation in this. So I watch for some time and do my meditation. Then I turn it off. He said, every place must be your place of practice. No exceptions. So it was wonderful, wonderful. Of course, as it was clear in the meetings, he said there were many, many difficulties that you would encounter as teachers, but that's our job. It's not that it's supposed to be easy, but to work with those difficulties. And even the Dalai Lama has many difficulties. There's a story from the Zen tradition that I heard actually from one of these Zen teachers there, of a very intensive training program in a Zen monastery where you come in and you practice for 10 years, and after 10 years, you're allowed to say 2 words to the Zen master. So this student came in and practiced for 10 years. Actually, he practiced for longer than that. But after 10 years, he had his interview. And he went in and he bowed to the teacher. And the teacher said, yes. And the student said, hard beds. And the Zen master said, yes, I know, but there's, you can learn to overcome obstacles in practice and just have faith and keep practicing. And of course, the physical difficulties of the body will always be there, but our practice is to transcend those. Now you must go back and practice more. So he practiced for 10 more years, came into his interview and bowed to the master. And the master said, yes, how is it going? And in your practice, he said, bad food. The master said, yes, I know, we're renunciates. We don't eat in a very fancy way here, but this is a way of surrendering and of not expecting everything from life, and it's part of our practice. You must learn just to take what's given and live in a simple way, and it's purifying for the heart, and I'm sure you will learn. And, stick with it, and so he sent him back. 10 more years passed. Comes in to see the master. Bows, well, what do you have to say? 2 words, I quit. And then the master said to him, I knew you wouldn't stick it out. All you've done since you got here is complain. The point of it, the point of the story, and really the point of much of the dialogue in the meeting, is that spiritual life is not about avoiding difficulties, but about bringing the spirit like that sacred painting, bringing to every difficult circumstance the power of our heart to transform it in some way, to bring benefit, to awaken, even in those difficulties. So then we talked about, what about if you have conflict with your own teachers, with a Ajahn or Sayadaw or Roshi or Lama, where they want you to teach one way, and particularly as Westerners, where we see another way might be better. Or worse yet, where there's ethical problems with this teacher who's supposed to be a great teacher, but is doing something that's unethical. Or where you've taken these great tantric samaya vows with your teacher, where you promise for as many lifetimes as you come into existence to bind your spirit to awaken together with this teacher. What to do when you face problems with these teachers? And the Dalai Lama, certain people particularly who had that in their lives and their practice, it was really an agony for them, a very great difficulty, because they loved their teachers and had learned these incredible things. And on the other hand, there's this other stuff that was terrible, and what to do, the kind of divided loyalties. And the Dalai Lama said, it is the same for me. He said, when I was younger in Tibet, I had two regents, in my case, who were to care for Tibet while I was still not coming of age as a Dalai Lama. And these regents, who were also teachers for me, were power hungry, he said. And they began to fight, and they fought, and one got the Tibetan army, and the other got part of the Tibetan army, and it was terrible for our country. At one point, I had to even call in the Chinese army, which is a very terrible thing, because that's part of the consequences of that was the loss of Tibetan freedom. He said these are terrible things. He could feel how wrenching it had been for him. And he said, and I had to publicly denounce my own regents and my own teachers, to step out of that and say, this is wrong. This is not the following of the Dharma. He said, you must let people know what is wrong. Put it in the newspaper if you must do so. But tell people there is no price that is worth paying to cover up that which is wrong. We must let people know. It was very, very kind of compelling to hear him speak. Then one of the Western Zen masters who was there spoke about their conflict with their own teacher, the kinds of difficulties they had with the ethical conduct or other ways with their teacher. One of the kinds of teachers whose understanding is that ethical rules are for students, but masters, lamas, whatever, they're above rules, so forth. You know how that goes and where the story ends, anyway. And yet this person was asking, how can it be, because this teacher is quite a fantastic teacher, really had extraordinary interviews or koan studies or whatever kind of Zen practice it was, and very deep shared realization of the void, of shunyata, of enlightenment. How can it be then that this happens? And the Dalai Lama listened. He said, I've wondered for some time. I'm kind of tentatively asked this question, but I've wondered sometimes about some of the kinds of understandings that you have, whether in Zen or other traditions, maybe even our tradition, some of the understandings that you call enlightenment or emptiness. Maybe needs a little bit of questioning here, he said. Because if there are ethical difficulties with teachers, it means somehow that their realization is incomplete, that it's not real enlightenment, or it's not complete enlightenment in some way. He said, if you have a genuine experience of shunyata, it doesn't mean the void, of emptiness, of disappearance of things, but of interdependence. To understand, to awaken to the true nature of things is to discover our genuine oneness with all beings, to discover the value of all life, of every life is a part of your own life. You can't separate yourself even from the insects. They are part of what keeps you alive on this earth, he said. And you think, well, maybe I'm better than an insect because I can think or write or something. But then if you look closely, what says that you have a greater right to be here than this insect in front of you? In another way, if you look, perhaps, he said, the insect is better than you are. It has, for one thing, it has more innocence than you do, doesn't it? He said. And perhaps that insect is less destructive than you are. So you have to really see, if your enlightenment is genuine, it doesn't leave out a single creature. So then we talked, sometimes very frankly, the stories about particularly the kind of betrayals or scandals or painful situations where teachers got so isolated and then misused money or power or sexuality, the kinds of things that one hears about, not just in Buddhism or Hinduism, but, in all kinds of positions of power in the church, whether it's television ministers or priests or doctors or whatever it happens to be. And how frequent these kind of things can be when teachers become isolated. And then we talk about the problems that give rise to this, not only the isolation of teachers and how to avoid that, but the kind of myths that support it. For example, the teachings of crazy wisdom, Dalai Lama said, crazy wisdom? No such thing. I think crazy wisdom, maybe not possible. Kind of excuse. And then someone said, well, there are these teachings in Tantra that you teach of the marriage of the masculine and feminine, this kind of symbolic wedding inside these great practices and these paintings of men and women joined in a union. And that these tantric teachings also sometimes in the stories happen literally between a man and a woman. And Dalai Lama said, yes, there are stories like the great Tibetan teacher Tilopa, who slept with various students and they were enlightened from this. And they said, well, this is part of the problem, Your Holiness. This might be nice in theory, but how do you actually do this practice? And he said, well, I don't know. I'm a monk myself. But he said, although people have asked me to do this with them, but I'm a monk. I'm not. But he said, truthfully, you can only do such practice if there is no sexual desire, he said. And what this means is that if someone gives you a goblet of wine and a glass of urine and a plate of this ambrosia, wonderful food, and a plate of excrement, you must be in such a state that you can eat from all four of those things, and it makes no difference to you what it is. He said, then maybe you can do this practice. So then someone said, well, how many lamas, how many teachers can do this? He said, very few. And then one of the women sitting there said, well, who? Would you give us a name? And he thought for a while, and then he looked up and he said, Zero. Nobody that I can think of. It was a very important moment, actually. And then somebody in the back of the room said, well, at least we have a taste test now, if these people want to try it. Let's give them the taste test to see if they're ready. It was Bob Thurman. So then I said, all right, Your Holiness, let's take this a step further in trying to consider this. Take this picture, because it's not uncommon. Imagine that there is a woman who comes to practice. It can be a man, because it happens for men as well, who has grown up in a family where there has been abuse, where there's been physical abuse, or even worse, sexual abuse in some way by her father or uncle or someone in the family. And that leaves her very gravely wounded, in much, much pain for much of her life, not feeling terrible about herself, feeling that she is dirty or unworthy or confused and terrible. And then she hears about the Buddhist teachings of compassion and awakening. And she comes to a teacher, a Lama or a Zen master or whoever it happens to be. And the master says, wonderful. A Dakini come to complete my mandala teachings, this is sort of the Tibetan language for using that. Like a female angel to come down and we will do wonderful tantric practice together. And so this Lama or teacher, whoever it is, says, come into my bedroom and I will teach you the higher teachings or whatever. And they have a sexual relationship. And then 2 weeks later, the Lama or teacher, whoever it is, goes on to the next person. And she, who came for healing and for teaching, then feels used like an animal or betrayed because this was someone that was really going to benefit her, and instead doesn't at all do that. And worse, what it does is the same thing that happened to her. It makes the very same pain compounded. Because here she finally thought she would find some healing, some release from this, and instead it's done all over again by the teacher. And then she has nowhere to turn. She's come to the Dharma as a place to find healing and liberation, and now she has no one to go to. And he really understood that. He said, this is terrible. We cannot have this happening. So what you must do when you see this happening, teachers, whoever it is first refuse. If something is wrong, you must refuse to go along with it. You must stand up and explain why you cannot do it, even fight with your teacher if necessary, and then if necessary, leave. And he said, if there's anything that I can help with, if there's anyone that you know that I have some authority with, you must tell me because I really want to know. He said, even if it's your own teacher, if it's really destructive, put it in the newspapers. Tell people that this is just not right. It is a sacred trust to be a spiritual teacher, and we must educate people that this is corruption. This is not the teachings of the Dharma. So then he said, many problems. Do you have more problems? Bring them out, he said. That's what we are here for. Later we can celebrate. Now we will face the problems.